Among the many enigmatic cultures and civilizations of the past, most are perfectly understandable and logical. Yet Egypt remains silent in this regard. It doesn't answer questions. It only peers through the stone faces of gods, through faded reliefs, through the dry air of eternity that knows no time. Everything we call history crumbles here into dust and symbols. There are places where tours don't go. There are symbols that disappear from photographs. There are sarcophagi that refuse to open. Archaeologists lose their memories. Compasses spin. Sounds come from empty halls. These are not legends. They are facts, recorded, documented, and forgotten. Today we'll open 40 doors, and behind each one lies a silence that knows more than we're willing to hear. Each chapter will reveal the mysteries of Egypt that still haunt scholars around the world. Empty tomb under the Sphinx. For millennia, the Great Sphinx of Giza has remained a symbol of silence. But not everyone knows that beneath its paws lies a cavity. It was recorded in the 20th century using seismographic methods. A rectangular chamber, approximately 12 meters deep, within the bedrock. No official expedition has received permission to open it. The reason is unclear. Some claim the internal structure is unstable. Others say the traces of radiation found within leave no doubt. It is not a burial, but something else. An American team that gained access to the seismic data declared the chamber empty. And yet, the instruments record a sound. It occurs every spring, precisely at 4 in the morning for 1 minute. A steady hum, like a low call, emanating not from below, but as if from within time. It's unknown whether anyone was inside. It's unknown what exactly it was supposed to contain. But it is known that since 1974, 3 archaeologists who stood over this site have disappeared. 1 without a trace. 1 without a memory. 1 remained silent until his death. Some Egyptologists believe this was the legendary Hall of Knowledge written about by the priests of Heliopolis. But if so, where are the inscriptions? Where are the symbols? Why didn't the stone leave a single mark? Or did it leave one, but not on those who looked with their eyes, and not while they were looking? The Sphinx does not speak. He waits. Secret chamber under the Pyramid of Cheops. The Great Pyramid of Giza is more than just a structure. It's a system that defies understanding. Inside, it is a chamber that no tourist or satellite can see. Its existence was detected in 2017 using muon tomography, a technology that uses cosmic particles to study the structure of stone. Researchers have discovered an anomalous void above the so-called Grand Gallery, a space nearly 30 meters long, hidden in the very heart of the structure. And most importantly, there's not a single passage leading there. No tunnel, no shaft, nothing. What does this room contain? Why was it left untouched? The pyramid's builders left almost everything behind. Corridors, ventilation ducts, tool marks. But this cavity feels alien, as if it wasn't part of the architectural plan, but appeared later or earlier. Attempts to drill access to it were rejected. Egyptian authorities cited the monument's safety. But unofficially, museum staff in Cairo said the research had been suspended on orders from above. Why? One of the scientists from the Scan Pyramids project resigned immediately after the images were released. A second fled the country. A third simply disappeared from public view. The nature of the muon reflection showed that it wasn't empty space inside, but something with a density different from rock. That is, the chamber isn't empty. It's filled. With what? Metal? Organic matter? Or something that doesn't reflect normally? Comparisons with other pyramids provide no answer. There are no analogs anywhere. The interior architecture of Cheops is already unexplained. Ventilation shafts reaching to the stars, corridors without functions, chambers without sarcophagi. And now, a sealed cavity that cannot be opened. Some independent researchers speculate that this chamber is an ancient resonator, tuned to the frequency of sound or even human thought. One engineer claimed that his instruments detected magnetic field fluctuations in the chamber. However, he was unable to replicate the experiment. Access to the equipment was blocked, and the building itself was sealed by security. This chamber exists. It's impossible to ignore, but it's also impossible to approach. It doesn't speak, it doesn't call, it doesn't pulse. And that's precisely what's most disturbing. Because the pyramid is silent only when someone inside is listening. An inscription on the wall of Osirian, written in unfamiliar symbols. The Osirian in Abydos is one of the most enigmatic structures in Egypt. It is unlike any other temple. Its foundations are below water level, its stone blocks weigh up to 100 tons, and the structures themselves seem to have fallen from another architectural era. Many Egyptologists agree. Osirian is older than the neighboring temple of Seti I, despite the official dating claiming otherwise. Everything here is out of place. But the strangest discovery was made in 1999, when the water level temporarily dropped and workers cleared the western wall. Beneath the limescale, an inscription was revealed. Not hieroglyphs, not Greek, not Coptic. 32 symbols engraved with laser-like precision. Visually, they resembled intersecting rings, curves without beginning or end, and flowing geometric shapes that couldn't be assigned to any alphabet. Scientists photographed the inscription and made copies, but the very next day, the stone began to crumble. A week later, the inscription had disappeared completely. The wall was covered in a network of cracks, and the area was flooded again. Among those who studied the photograph was Dr. Ingrid Haller, a Swiss linguist and specialist in ancient languages. She stated that the symbols do not carry phonetic meaning. They represent a structure based on symmetry and repetition. 3 groups of 10 symbols, and 2 highlighted ones, the initial and final ones. But most importantly, digital analysis revealed that the distances between the symbols corresponded to a specific musical sequence. Roughly speaking, the inscription could be played. The composer commissioned for the project recreated the sound interpretation. The result is a 40-second-long soundtrack containing low pulsations, subtle, high-frequency vibrations, and something resembling wordless vocals. Those who listened to the recording described it as a feeling of an approaching sound that never arrived. Several people complained of headaches, 2 of déjà vu. One reported seeing symbols moving across the night sky in a dream. Not a single academic journal accepted the paper about this discovery. The musical version was deleted from the server. Dr. Haller committed suicide 6 months later. A drawing of the Osirian wall was found in her apartment, but with different symbols, as if they had changed. There were now 34 of them. Today, a photo of the inscription is kept in a private collection and is rarely published. Some are convinced it is a message left by a prehistoric civilization. Others believe it is not a message, but a mechanism. That this code is not for reading, but for activation. That the Osirian is not a tomb, not a temple, but a device connected not to the gods, but to the very fabric of space. And if one day the water level drops again, the symbols might return. But no one knows if they'll change again, or if they'll stare at us not from the wall, but from somewhere closer, much closer. A golden mask that is not in the archives, but is in old photos. In 1924, an expedition led by British archaeologist Charles Blake was excavating in the El Bahari region, near the famous temple of Hatshepsut. The excavations were difficult. Sand obscured the ancient burial sites, and every step risked damaging the fragile structures. But one discovery changed everything. At a depth of about 5 meters, an unmarked sarcophagus was discovered. Inside was a perfectly preserved female body, wearing a mask of pure gold. The mask wasn't the only unusual thing. Engraved on its forehead was a symbol not found in any known Egyptian source, a circle crossed by 2 horizontal lines. No priestly sign corresponded to it. No alphabet knew such proportions. However, the real story began later. The mask was photographed, measured, documented, and then disappeared. The day after the discovery, a sandstorm began. When the archaeologists returned, the sarcophagus was empty. No body, no mask. The official announcement was, "Move to a guarded camp." But the Cairo Museum archives contain no record of the delivery. The lists of items handed over by the expedition make no mention of the mask. Charles Blake left Egypt 3 months later and never returned to the excavations. Letters sent by his assistant to London contain disturbing phrases. "It continued to stare even after it was removed, and we felt that the eyes beneath the mask were not closed." In 1981, French historian Marcel Dorget published an article about lost artifacts. The appendix included a photograph of a woman wearing a gold mask, clearly taken in the desert. It was the very same mask, but the photo was captioned, "Anonymous image, provenance unconfirmed." 3 months later, Marcel disappeared while traveling in Egypt. Today, the mask officially no longer exists. It's not listed, not in museums, not in publications. But it does appear in 3 photographs found in different countries, in which the reflection in its eyes differs from the landscape. One of these reflections is a human silhouette standing in the corner, which wasn't there when the photo was taken. Sometimes archaeology loses objects, but when a face made of gold and silence is lost, it means it didn't want to be found. And perhaps it's still looking. An underground river beneath Luxor that is not on the maps. In Luxor, beneath layers of temples, sand, and asphalt, lies something not mentioned in tourist brochures. In 2009, a team of geophysicists from Cairo University conducted a standard seismic survey in the area between the Karnak and Luxor temples. The goal was simple, to determine the rock density before construction of an underground tunnel. However, what the instruments recorded ruined all plans. At a depth of approximately 40 meters, in rock previously considered monolithic, a void was detected, a long, curved cavity stretching almost 2 kilometers. The equipment captured movement within the void. The model showed a slow flow of liquid, in perfectly sealed conditions. A river. The official report was classified, but one of the students working with copies of the data published a visualization on a closed forum. He claimed that a heat tunnel exists beneath Luxor, with water temperatures 8 degrees higher than the surrounding environment. Reflectance spectrum analysis revealed an unusual composition of the fluid. It doesn't match either rainwater or groundwater in the region. It's as if this flow isn't related to surface hydrology at all. Local Copts say that a serpent sleeps in the earth beneath Luxor, breathing water. This phrase is part of an ancient myth recorded by Herodotus, but considered an allegory. Now it's been remembered. In 2011, with political events distracting everyone's attention, drilling operations began secretly in Luxor. But that same night, a rock collapse began in the southern section of the old quarter. Several streets sank, and one school was evacuated due to underground noise. Local administration reports listed the event as natural ground subsidence. However, residents recalled strange vibrations and a damp, heavy air rising from cracks. A week later, everything stopped. The area was cordoned off. Access was blocked. No more traces of underground water were found. But the archives retained a recording. One of the CCTV cameras on the night of the collapse recorded a shadow appearing on the wall of the mosque located directly above the supposed river. Not a person, not an animal, but an elongated gliding form, like a stream of smoke moving against the wind. The camera went dark after 30 seconds. Since then, the topic of the underground river in Luxor has remained quiet. Scientists refuse to comment. The data has been deleted. But one person involved in the project said years later, "We haven't discovered a river. We may have awakened what was sleeping within it, and it knows who we are." And if the water underground really does move on its own, perhaps it's not just a stream. Perhaps it's someone's path. With a statue that turns to the east every morning, no mechanism, In Hall 4 of the Cairo Museum stands a small statuette, no more than 25 centimeters tall. At first glance, it looks no different from the others. Ancient basalt, dark in color, the figure of an unknown official from the Middle Kingdom. The statue was discovered in 1933 in one of the side chambers near the Serapeum, the underground necropolis of sacred bulls in Saqqara. Archaeologists paid it almost no attention. No name, no cartouche, no inscriptions. Only the strange shape of the eyes, too round, too protruding, as if they were intended not for representation, but for observation. It wasn't until 2006, during an inventory of the collection, that museum guards noticed something strange. Every morning, the statue would turn. Slightly, just a few degrees, but always in the same direction, east. By morning, it would shift position, and by evening, it would remain motionless. CCTV cameras showed that movement only occurs when the hall is empty. Not at night, not during the day, but specifically at dawn, from approximately 4:20 to 4:33 a.m., when the first rays of light touch the horizon but do not reach the museum windows. The statue was checked for hidden mechanisms. The base is solid with no pins, hinges, or bushings. The weight is evenly distributed, and the material is monolithic. The floor in the hall was level, without any slope. No explanation was found. Then scientists proposed a micro-vibration theory, supposedly caused by visitors' footsteps, traffic on the street, and building vibrations. To test this, the statue was placed in an isolated capsule for 2 weeks, a sealed, shock-absorbing container isolated from all external vibrations. The cameras recorded the same thing. At 4:21 a.m., the statue began to turn. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. But the movement was there. By 4:33 a.m., it stopped. Always precise, always the same. Following the publicity surrounding the incident, the statue was closed to the public. It was removed from the main hall, citing the need for restoration. But museum staff continued to report that those who approach it too closely later complain of ringing in the ears, nausea, and dreams featuring a stranger, a man with a smooth face and no eyes. These complaints came from different people at different times, but with the same details. In dreams, the person stands motionless, but time passes strangely, quickly, jerkily, without logic, as if it weren't a dream, but a transmission of something, glitched through noise. Some researchers claim the statue may be a signaling object, that it responds not to light, not to air movement, not to physical impact, but to something intangible. Perhaps to electromagnetic impulses emanating from deep processes within the earth. Or perhaps to the activity of the pyramidal grid itself as the ancients described it. But there's a more sinister hypothesis. It's mentioned in only one report, kept in the museum's archives. It states that the shape of the pupils on the surface of the statue's eye socket matches the shape of an ancient symbol found in a chamber near the Osirian. A symbol that, according to legend, depicted not an eye, but a passage. And if the statue truly reacts, then perhaps it doesn't turn toward the light, but toward the one who is looking at that moment. After all, sometimes movements happen not because someone arrived, but because someone woke up. Papyrus mentioning the creation of time. In 1904, in the area of El Ashmunain, the ancient city of Hermopolis, a British expedition led by Sir Reginald Fitzgerald discovered a small box made of petrified wood in one of the ruined crypts. Inside was a charred, nearly crumbling papyrus scroll. It wasn't retrieved on site. The box was sealed and sent to London, to the British Museum, where it lay in storage for over 50 years. It wasn't until 1963, thanks to advances in infrared spectroscopy, that the contents were partially deciphered without unrolling the scroll. The papyrus proved unique. It contained no prayers, lists, or names. It was a description, but not of lands, deities, or kings. Rather, it described the structure of time. The text, preserved in 34 phrases, used words found only in ritual formulas from the early dynastic era. The translators found it difficult to interpret. The phrases resembled formulas, but not magical ones, more geometric or topological. One line mentions the concept of before the first rhythm, another, movement without a path, and a third, a ring coiled into a snake, but not biting its tail. This is a reference not to the typical Ouroboros, but to its original form, a symbol of infinity before its unfolding. The most frightening thing was that, judging by the annotations of linguists, the text was not written to be read. It lacked introductory phrases, addresses, or ritual openings. The papyrus was created not as a message, but as an instruction manual. And at the end of the text stands a symbol that remains undeciphered. A vertical line crossed by 9 horizontal ones and a spiral around them, as if wrapping them from within. Even stranger is the documented impact on the researchers. One of the scientists involved in the project began suffering from bouts of disorientation. He lost track of events. He could remember tomorrow, but not yesterday. Another developed a rare form of prosopagnosia, an inability to recognize faces, including one's own. But all of this only began after working with the transcription, even without physical contact with the papyrus. After a series of incidents, the text was removed from public view, and the scroll itself was moved. Today, its official location is unknown. The museum holds an empty box with a sign that reads, "Item temporarily undergoing restoration." Some researchers suggest that this wasn't just a text, it was a protocol, a record of an attempt to create a temporal vector directed not from the past to the future, but vice versa. And if the structure of time was shifted even once, even within a single room, the consequences could remain in its field, in the memory of the walls, in the consciousness of those present. Papyrus hasn't disappeared. It may simply exist in a moment that hasn't yet arrived, or has already ended, but we are still in it, or are just entering it. A temple built backwards, and no one knows why. On the southern border of modern Egypt, almost on the edge of Sudan, stands a temple that has no name. It's not marked on maps, not included in tourist routes, and there are almost no references to it in archives. Locals simply call it the House in Reverse. Built of heavy sandstone, it features an inner courtyard, corridors, and 3 halls. At first glance, it looks no different from hundreds of other temples from the 19th dynasty. That is, until you step inside. The temple is designed backwards, and not in terms of its orientation toward the sun or the placement of the columns, but in the very logic of movement. All the architectural elements that were supposed to lead the viewer from the entrance to the sanctuary are designed in the opposite direction. The interweaving of colonnades and openings, which in traditional temples create the effect of immersion into the sacred space, here lead outward. Each room becomes less and less decorated as you move forward. Everything leads to emptiness. The final hall is bare, with uneven walls and no trace of an altar. No images, no inscriptions, no niches. Only a single flat stone in the center, on which lies a fragment of a sacrificial knife. It's rusted but polished, as if someone continued to touch it. When you try to enter the temple from the wrong side, through the supposed sanctuary, the architecture suddenly becomes logical. The walls come alive with ornamentation, the columns acquire a rhythm, and then you get the feeling you're moving along the right path. But this path isn't inward, but outward, toward the entrance, toward what should be the beginning. And here it is, the end. An engineering analysis revealed that the temple had not been reconstructed. It had been designed this way from the start. The block bases, niches, and ventilation ducts all conform to the reverse orientation. Not a single error, not a single trace of subsequent modification. This is not a reconstruction. This is deliberate design. Psychophysiologists studying the behavior of people inside noted unusual effects. Many experienced a persistent feeling of oblivion, as if they were forgetting why they came there. Some began moving not forward, but backward, instinctively. One woman, a researcher, walked the entire route in reverse order, from the end to the entrance, and uttered a phrase that was recorded on a voice recorder. Now he knows I'm here." She didn't remember saying it. She didn't specify who he was. There's a theory among esotericists that this temple isn't a sanctuary, but a trap, an architectural inversion created not to connect with God, but to isolate oneself from something or someone. And all that inner emptiness isn't an absence, it's a mask, because perhaps this place isn't for prayer, but for confinement, not of faith, but of consciousness. And he who has gone to the end no longer moves on. He remains, on the other side of the void. Black sarcophagi made of Aswan granite. Who made them? Deep within the Serapeum necropolis in Saqqara, among underground galleries hidden from daylight, stand sarcophagi that remain inexplicable. 24 gigantic boxes crafted from solid black Aswan granite. Each weighs over 70 tons. Their lids weigh 30 tons. Inside, there is emptiness. No mummies, no shrouds, no artifacts. Only silence and perfectly polished walls. The problem isn't just size. Aswan granite is one of the hardest stones on the planet. Even with today's technology, processing it requires machines, diamond cutters, coolants, and precision lathes. But the surface of these sarcophagi is polished to a mirror finish. The margin of error is less than 2/10,000ths of a millimeter. This isn't just ancient technology. It's technology that's impossible to replicate even today, without a colossal amount of effort. The official version claims that the sarcophagi served as burial chambers for sacred Apis bulls. However, not a single one of them contains remains. Not a single trace of organic matter. Not a single ritual inscription on the interior walls. This is an exception in Egypt, where even a clay vessel was accompanied by a name, a formula, a symbol. Here, there is a smooth, black silence. In 1993, Japanese research engineer Dr. Toru Yamaoka conducted acoustic tests inside one of the sarcophagi. He installed microphones and emitted a low-frequency sound. The result was unexpected. A resonance arose in response, inconsistent with the geometry of the interior space. The echo seemed to arrive with a delay, as if it were reflecting not off the granite walls, but off something else. Dr. Yamaoka called this the reverse room effect, when the sound seems to return from a point outside the physical volume. After the publication of the data, access to the galleries was temporarily closed. A year later, they reopened, but the researcher never returned to Egypt. Unofficial reports indicate he abandoned his academic career. Some speculate that the sarcophagi aren't tombs, but containers, perhaps for storing something that wasn't supposed to be opened, or something that leaves no trace in material form. Another hypothesis is that they are resonators, structures tuned to a specific vibrational frequency, for communication, for activation, or for isolation. One Egyptologist, who wished to remain anonymous, claims that tiny metal inclusions, whose composition could not be determined, were found in one of the sarcophagus lids. A sample was sent for analysis. The results are classified. If these sarcophagi were made by humans, then they knew more than just geometry. They knew something about the structure of matter, sound, and emptiness. If not by humans, then by whom? And most importantly, why such a perfect form? To contain emptiness? The temple disappears from the photo, leaving behind a desert. On the edge of the Arabian desert in the area of modern-day El Kharga, there is a temple known only to local guides and a few researchers. It is not officially registered, is not listed in archaeological archives, and is unguarded. Built of sandstone, it's partially destroyed, but still stands. Above the entrance is a faded inscription. Inside are 4 columns and a stone basin with a crack filled with black sand. The air inside is heavy, viscous, as if motionless. Everything seems ordinary, until you pick up your camera. Any attempt to photograph the temple leads to the same result. The image shows only dunes, sand, emptiness, no walls, no columns. The people standing nearby are visible, shadows too, but the temple itself disappears. This isn't a lens error or a trick of the light. We've tried infrared filters, night photography, digital cameras, and analog film. The result is the same. It's not in the image. In 2008, a group of German researchers installed an automatic camera with a timer set to take pictures every 10 minutes. The camera operated for 3 days. When the memory card was opened, the temple appeared in only 2 frames. The remaining images showed only a horizon of sand, even though the camera had not moved. GPS tracking pinpointed the exact location. There was no error. An experiment was undertaken. Signs were painted on the walls, objects were left in front of the entrance, and flags were placed. In the photographs, everything disappeared along with the temple. Only for the 2 minutes it appeared was everything visible. And those 2 minutes coincided with sunrise, when the sun's rays touched the horizon at an angle of exactly 32 degrees. Afterward, shadow and emptiness. Some believe the temple doesn't exist permanently. It appears and disappears, shifted relative to our reality. Not physically, but energetically. It seems to exist in a spatial interval, accessible only at a certain time, under certain conditions, possibly dependent not only on the light, but also on the observer. Locals believe the temple sees those who photograph it, that it appears only to those who are ready, and disappears forever before those who ask the wrong question. Once, a guide named Khalil said something that was later recorded. "It doesn't like to be recognized, but if it appears in a photograph, it means you won't disappear either." After this, he went into the desert and never returned. The temple shots are 2 frames, black and white, grainy. But if you zoom in on one of them, you can see a figure is carved into the wall in the background, in profile, and the face on it, not Egyptian, not human. And it looks towards the camera, straight ahead, with a look that knows you'll be looking later, when it's no longer there. A tower that you can't look at for more than 3 minutes. In the center of the western desert, between Baris and El Dakhla, where there are no roads, only sand, stands a tower. It's invisible from the air. It doesn't show up on satellite images. Instead, a scorched spot appears, as if contrasted by the bright light. But the local Bedouin know where it is. They don't approach. They pass by. They say it's not a structure, but a place that stands. The tower is constructed from basalt blocks, dark, unprocessed, porous, as if torn from the depths of the earth. It stands about 8 meters tall. It has no entrance, no windows, no traces of steps. Only a vertical silhouette against the void and sky. The blocks are tightly but roughly fitted, and yet their surface is free of erosion. It's as if the tower isn't old, but rather newly constructed. The first documented evidence dates back to 1939. French explorer Pierre Delacroix described a vertical stone he found during a geological survey. He noted an unusual feature. When he tried to sketch the tower, his hands began to tremble. And when he looked at it for longer than 3 minutes, he began to feel as if everything around him was becoming too quiet. After this, Delacroix abandoned the project and left. 2 years later, he was found dead in Paris. In his notebook, there is a recurring fragment, a drawing of the tower made dozens of times, ever more accurately. In 1982, an Egyptian student named Sami Farid attempted to take photographs. He set up a camera aimed at the tower and began recording. After 4 minutes, the camera lens cracked. The tape was demagnetized. For a week, the student complained of headaches, insomnia, and the feeling that someone was standing behind him. 9 days later, he disappeared. His tent was found in the same spot, at the foot of the tower. The camera was intact, but the film was gone. No trace of him. Researchers who returned later described the same detail. When looking at the tower, the sense of time disappears. For some, hours passed like minutes. For others, the opposite was true. One archaeologist claimed to have heard the tower breathing. Another said its shadow didn't fall where it should have. Psychologists studying subjects' behavior in front of a photograph of the tower noted a strange effect. People lost the ability to judge its scale. Some saw it as a 20-meter building, others as a 3-meter monolith. Most disturbingly, 2 subjects, after 3 minutes of looking at the image, refused to turn their backs to it. One for an hour, the other forever. Today, scientists call the tower a spatial anomaly, but locals call it Nazira, which in Arabic means she who looks. And perhaps it's not that you can't look at it for too long. It's that, over time, it starts looking at you. Mummified animals with unknown DNA structures. In the Saqqara dungeons, at a depth of over 20 meters, lie kilometers of ancient catacombs, known as the Anubian tunnels. Thousands of mummified animals are found here: ibises, cats, jackals, crocodiles, monkeys. They are carefully arranged in niches, sealed in boxes, and wrapped in cloth. Most of them are offerings to the gods, ritual sacrifices known to archaeologists since the 19th century. However, in 2010, a French scientific team from Lyon discovered something that defies classification. In one of the far chambers, behind collapsed masonry, they found a blackwood box covered in layers of salt and resin. Inside were 2 mummies. They looked like predators: 4 legs, an elongated skull, and a short neck. The thick fur was preserved in fragments. But the strangest thing was that none of the participants could accurately identify the animal. Not a jackal, not a hyena, not a wolf. The legs were too long, the claws curved at an unnatural angle, and the skull seemed flattened from the side with a forked eye socket. The remains were delivered to a laboratory at Cairo University. Initial DNA analysis yielded alarming results. The fragments did not match any known species. Moreover, the nucleotide sequence in some sections did not fit terrestrial biological patterns at all. Roughly speaking, the structure looked as if it had been assembled by hand or deliberately engineered. The mutation rate exceeded acceptable limits. One biologist suggested it was the result of deep-seated radiation, but not the slightest background radiation was detected in the tunnels. Others proposed the theory of a lost subspecies. However, the resemblance to several terrestrial animals was fragmentary, as if these creatures were copies assembled from memory. Or from an image, X-rays revealed that the mummy's bones were hollow, but not like those of birds. Their internal structure resembled a honeycomb. Furthermore, a dense metallic thread was discovered in the spinal region, running the length of the body. It was not oxidized, it was not magnetic. It defied analysis. Until now. Following these discoveries, the objects were transferred to the museum's closed collection. Access to them is restricted. References to the find were removed from public records. The team's report was never published. Several expedition members withdrew from further work. One of them, in a private conversation, said only, "They're not from here." Or they were, the first. The question remains, if the ancient Egyptians mummified these creatures, it means they knew them. Did they revere them, fear them, or did they contain them? Because if they once existed here, that's one thing. But if they were brought from somewhere, then the tunnel isn't just a tomb. It's a cage, and the question isn't who put them there. The question is whether we've opened it again. The star map on the ceiling of the Temple of Hathor. Where does it come from? In Dendera, in the temple complex dedicated to the goddess Hathor, one of Egypt's most mysterious artifacts has been preserved, a star map carved into the ceiling of the inner sanctuary. This isn't just a decorative depiction of the night sky, it's a complete constellation chart with precise indications of the stars, the ecliptic, the phases of the moon, and the movements of the planets. Some consider it the oldest astronomical map in human history. But the problem isn't its age. The problem is its impossibility. According to official estimates, the bas-relief is approximately 2,000 years old. It was created during the Ptolemaic era when the influence of Greek astronomy was strong. However, a 1994 study by a group of astrophysicists from the University of Toulouse showed that the map depicts the position of the stars more than 10,000 years before Christ, around 10,450 BCE. At the center of the composition is the constellation Leo, located directly beneath the Sun on the day of the vernal equinox. And it was at this very point exactly that year, neither before nor after. This point is associated with the completion of the Great Stellar Cycle, the precessional period, which lasts approximately 25,800 years. This means that the map records more than just a date. It records an event that occurs once per era. How could the ancient Egyptians have known this? They had no telescopes, no coordinate system, not even the basic geometry of spherical space. And yet Sirius, Orion, Altair, Pollux, and even stars invisible to the naked eye are precisely marked on the ceiling. The bas-relief also depicts strange creatures bearing the firmament. One of them holds a sphere with an eye at its center. Another is a winged snake-like creature embracing a solar disk. These figures are not found in other temples. They are unnamed, unexplained, but around them are lines that resemble trajectories, as if they have flown in. There's a theory that the star map wasn't created by the Egyptians, but merely copied from an older source, perhaps an artifact lost or hidden. Some suggest it was passed on to priests by an unknown culture that existed long before the dawn of written history, a culture that not only knew the sky, but also used it as a code, as a key. Later, part of the relief was transferred to the Louvre, the Zodiac of Dendera. But one unnoticed symbol remained on the remaining ceiling, a tiny star carved outside the diagram, off to the side. Its position doesn't correspond to any constellation, but if it were plotted on a modern map of the sky and reflected as in a mirror, it would indicate the region from which the so-called WOW signal, a radio message of unknown origin recorded from Earth, came in 1977. Perhaps it's a coincidence, or perhaps the temple ceiling is more than just a map. It's a message about a date, about a place, about a return, when the sky aligns with the same point again. And perhaps it won't be an observation, but a meeting. Reliefs depicting modern mechanisms. In the same Temple of Hathor in Dendera, in a deep corridor beneath the main hall, there is a niche, access to which is restricted to tourists. On its wall is a bas-relief that has sparked decades of controversy and denial of explanation. The image is known as the Dendera lamp. It depicts an elongated capsule or bulb-shaped structure within which runs a curved line resembling an incandescent filament. A snake-like creature extends from the base of the lamp, lying within the device. To the right, a human figure holds something resembling a fork or handle. The entire image appears to be carved into the stone plinth and framed by technical symmetry. Classical Egyptology maintains that this is not a lamp, but a symbolic image of a snake emerging from a lotus flower, a symbol of the deity Hea. However, engineers examining the relief came to a different conclusion. One of them, the Austrian physicist Karl Wolff, conducted a geometric analysis of the image in 1979 and concluded that the shape of the bulb and the proportions of the filament corresponded to the parameters of a gas discharge tube. He compared the image with early drawings of Crookes lamps, the prototypes of modern fluorescent lamps. The match was eerily accurate. Additionally, nearby are depicted elements that resemble transformers connected by cables. Some of these cables enter the figures of priests as if they were receiving electricity, and none of these symbols are accompanied by standard hieroglyphs. They simply are there. Later, in the 1990s, a Japanese film crew conducted a magnetometric analysis inside the temple. Anomalous fluctuations in the magnetic field were recorded in the area of the relief. The effect could not be replicated. The instruments showed a flat line, however the recording was preserved. There's another image in the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. There, at the top of the ceiling cornice, one can discern figures resembling a helicopter, a tank, a submarine, and something resembling an airplane plan. Egyptologists explain this as a palimpsest, the superposition of several inscriptions that merge over time. However, no one explains why the superposition results in these particular outlines. Some suggest that images are not blueprints, not technologies, but memories, transmitted through images, preserved from time to time, from civilization to civilization. Others go further and argue the ancients saw these devices not as symbols, but literally, not as the future, but as a remnant of the past. Because time can be not a straight line, but a spiral. And on its turns, memory repeats itself. And then the question is not what we see on the wall, but whether they saw us. A prayer found in a sarcophagus predicting a 21st century war. In 2003, during the restoration of a New Kingdom-era tomb in the Luxor area, workers discovered a hidden compartment in the wall of an inner chamber. Hidden behind a stone slab was a small copper container, hand-sealed and strangely darkened, as if exposed not to time but to temperature. Inside was a papyrus fragment just over 20 centimeters long. It was covered in dense rows of hieroglyphs, written not in black, but in a rich red paint, almost ochre. Analysis revealed that this was not dye, but dried blood mixed with pigment. The text turned out to be neither a funerary formula nor an excerpt from the Book of the Dead. It was a prayer. But its structure differed from classical texts. There was no appeal to a god or a pharaoh. There was no description of the journey beyond the grave. The text mentioned events set in a time significantly beyond the era in which it was written. The most striking phrase is the one that states, "When 33 times 40 moons have passed, the fire of man will rise above the two towers, and then the countdown to the desert of ashes will begin." The decipherment yielded a precise value, 1,320 lunar months, which is approximately 110 years. Since the tomb's owner died around 1901 BC, this date pointed to the 21st century. Some researchers have linked this passage to the events of September 11, 2001. The mention of two towers, fire, and the subsequent period of desert of ashes is perceived as a description of the global conflict engulfing the Middle East and its aftermath. Another passage speaks of a bird of iron bringing fear and of children of the West covering their faces in a house of sand. These words are remarkably similar to modern military realities: airstrikes, protective masks, conflicts in desert regions. But all of this is recorded within the structure of ancient Egyptian poetics, as part of a ritual sequence, as if the author were not describing it, but memorizing it. The papyrus was transferred to a restricted section of the Egyptian Museum. The scholarly publication was published in a limited edition and was withdrawn 3 weeks later. One of the linguists involved in deciphering it claimed that the prayer was not a request, but a warning. She wasn't asking for protection, but rather recording the course of the future. The style of the text suggested that this wasn't a prophecy, but a repetition, a cycle that had already occurred before. Later, during a second infrared scan of the sarcophagus, additional symbols were discovered on the inside of the lid. They are invisible to the naked eye and were not applied with paint, but rather by incising the stone structure as if the stone had been burned from the inside in precise spots, following a specific pattern. These symbols have not yet been deciphered, but their structure resembles binary code. When the prayer's structure was fed into a simulator of ancient Egyptian poetry, the system discovered that the rhythm of the text perfectly matched the sequence of Morse code signals. This was no coincidence. The text seemed primed for transmission, through sound, through light, through any medium. And if this is truly true, then the author not only knew the future, he knew how to ensure it would not be forgotten. A tomb where the temperature remains constant for thousands of years. In the desert near Aswan, off the beaten track, in the rocky ridge of Jebel el Silsila, A tomb was discovered in 1958 that did not attract much attention. The report in the archives was brief. A solitary confinement cell, no inscriptions, no ritual objects, an empty sarcophagus. But decades later, in 2012, a group of independent researchers decided to re-examine the forgotten objects. What they discovered defied explanation. The temperature inside the tomb was absolutely stable, 23.4 degrees Celsius, regardless of time of day, season, or climate. While the surrounding stone heats up to 45 degrees Celsius during the day and drops below 10 degrees Celsius at night, the temperature inside is consistently warm, like a closed room with climate control. Only there's no climate control. Dozens of measurements were taken using laser thermometers, infrared sensors, and thermal imagers. All confirmed the same thing. The temperature inside the tomb is not just stable, it doesn't fluctuate even by 1/10 of a degree. Furthermore, no ventilation shafts, hidden cavities, or signs of insulation were found. The walls are bare sandstone. The ceiling is monolithic. The entrance is standard, not sealed. Inside the tomb, there's no wind, no echo, and according to the expedition members, sound seems to be absorbed. The ordinary rustling of clothing or footsteps sounds dull and muffled, as if the space itself refuses to be heard. Physicists proposed a hypothesis. Perhaps the tomb is located above an underground geothermal anomaly, but thermal scanning revealed only stone beneath it, no heat sources. And most importantly, the temperature inside the tomb matches that of a comfortable human body. This isn't just stability, it's purposeful. In the center of the room stands a sarcophagus. It is empty. There are no signs of burial. However, an engraving, barely visible in normal light, was discovered on the inside of the lid. The symbol resembles a handprint. It's not engraved, but rather burned from the inside. Analysis revealed that the stone structure in this area is fused at the microcrystal level, as if exposed to high-frequency radiation. The technology for this didn't exist in ancient times. One of the researchers spent 45 minutes alone inside. Afterward, he reported feeling as if someone was breathing nearby. Later, when reviewing the audio recording, a background sound was detected, a steady one, with a frequency of about 6 Hertz. This frequency matches the waves that occur in the brain during deep trance and meditation. Today, access to the tomb is restricted. The official reason is soil instability. But employees who have been inside still can't explain the most important thing. Why doesn't the temperature change when everything around it is in perpetual motion? There's no answer. But perhaps the chamber wasn't designed to hold a body. It was designed for someone to return to when the right temperature was reached. It's the same thing, always, as an entry point, or a point of return. A stone that evaporates moisture around itself, even in the desert. In the desert area between Hurghada and El Minya, a strange fragment of black stone was discovered in the mid-20th century. It wasn't part of the ruins, wasn't part of a burial site, and didn't match the typical geology of the region. The stone was found on the surface, a funnel-shaped depression like the mark of a fall, and in its center lay a block weighing about 50 kilograms, with a perfectly smooth surface reminiscent of polished obsidian, but with a matte sheen devoid of reflections. Workers found it, and several hours after removing it from the site, they noticed something inexplicable. The moisture around the stone disappeared completely. The sand, usually dense and with a characteristic degree of moisture at depth, became dry several meters deep. In the bottles left nearby, the water evaporated faster than usual, not through the open necks, but even in the sealed containers. Air humidity near the site was measured with instruments and consistently dropped to 0, in conditions where the general value in the desert is usually between 20 and 30%. The stone was delivered to a laboratory at the Cairo Geological Institute. Tests revealed that its mineralogical composition did not match known Egyptian rocks. Furthermore, the internal structure of the crystals indicated extremely high pressure and temperature during formation. conditions that cannot exist in any natural process on the Earth's surface. But most importantly, the evaporation effect was preserved. The stone pulled moisture from the air and any objects within a radius of approximately 1.5 meters. It was placed in an isolated chamber with a controlled microclimate. After 8 hours, the humidity inside dropped to absolute zero. At the same time, irregularities in the instrument behavior began to be detected. Clocks became out of sync, digital displays flickered, and the temperature fluctuated, despite the absence of external influences. The stone was later sent to Europe, according to unofficial reports, to CERN. Since then, it has not been reported in any scientific publications. Only the journal of one technician from the Egyptian laboratory remains. In it, in addition to his measurements, he wrote, "When you're near it for a long time, your tongue starts to dry out as if there's not enough saliva, and your eyes feel like dust, even if you close them." Another entry contains a disturbing remark. "I've started having dreams in which I find myself in a series of windowless rooms, and in each one there's a black object, like this stone, but it's not lying down, it's standing." Some speculate that it's a meteorite fragment. Others believe it's part of an ancient device designed to create a localized dry space. Still others are certain the object was created not for storage or measurement, but for removal. Not water, but life. Since the human body is 80% water, perhaps the stone isn't evaporating, but reverse extracting, not destroying the form, but drying out the essence. And if left nearby long enough, only a shadow will remain. No trace, no cry, just a dry imprint on the stone, an inverted hieroglyph in the heart of the Valley of the Kings. One of the little-known tombs in the Valley of the Kings, designated KV32, contains a tomb long considered unfinished. Its architecture differs from most royal burials. The corridor slopes upward at an angle rather than downward. The chambers are arranged crosswise rather than in a row, and the walls are virtually devoid of paintings. Almost, except for one. In the far room, a single hieroglyph is carved into a smooth wall. It seems to hang in the void, without text, without context, without a frame. It's the jet symbol, a pillar signifying stability, eternity, the persistence of time. But it's inverted, not mirrored, as was sometimes done in magical formulas. Specifically, it's geometrically inverted, upside down. This variant has never been encountered before. Egyptian tradition strictly adhered to the direction of writing. Any deviation had either a sacred or ritual purpose. But here there is no formula. One symbol, in the void. Inverted. It was discovered back in the 1930s but couldn't be explained. Archaeologists assumed it was a mistake. But upon closer inspection it became clear the symbol was carefully carved, deeply with perfect lines. An error was impossible. Later, Egyptologist Martin Reimer theorized that this wasn't an accident, but a deliberate change in meaning. When inverted, the jet symbol could represent not stability, but its destruction, not eternity, but the interruption of time. He linked this to the tomb's architecture, which violates classical planning principles, and to the fact that no sarcophagus, mummy, or grave goods were found within. Only this sign. As if the entire structure were not a tomb, but a portal, a place where time was meant to be stopped, or reversed. In 2008, a research team installed sensitive accelerometers and magnetometers in the chamber. For 2 weeks, stable fluctuations in the magnetic field were recorded, as if the space in the chamber were breathing. One day, the instruments detected a surge when a beam of sunlight penetrated a crack in the ceiling and hit the wall. The beam lasted less than 5 minutes, but when it hit the hieroglyph, the field disappeared. It then returned. Today, the tomb is closed to visitors. Unofficially, it's closed due to the risk of collapse. But employees who worked inside have reported that after spending long periods in the chamber, time begins to falter. Clocks stop, footsteps sound delayed, and breathing seems to have a different rhythm. One person described the sensation: "You're moving, but the world around you is standing still." Or conversely, "You're frozen, but everything moves on." This hieroglyph is perhaps the only one in Egypt that doesn't convey meaning, but rather cancels it. It doesn't speak of eternity. It erases it. The shadow of the obelisk points not to the north, but to the void. On a plateau near ancient Heliopolis, once the main center of the solar cult of Ra, stands a lone obelisk. It's damaged, broken off near the top, but still rises nearly 15 meters, sunk vertically into the ground. Its age is estimated at more than 3,500 years. But despite its destruction, it possesses a peculiarity that no one can explain. Its shadow defies the laws of astronomy. The first to notice this was surveying engineer Elias Nasser in 1991. While taking measurements, he noticed that at midday, the obelisk's shadow deviated from true north not by the expected few degrees, but by almost 40. It pointed not toward the Earth's magnetic field, not along the axis of rotation, not toward the sun. It pointed into nothingness, where, by all calculations, there was nothing. On-site testing of the compasses revealed stable operation. Astronomical instruments showed no anomalies. However, if you track the shadow over days and seasons, it doesn't follow an arc, as happens with any vertical object. Its trajectory is compressed, twisted, and blurred on certain days, especially on the vernal equinox. Then the shadow wanders for several minutes as if unable to find a stable projection. In 2005, a group of Belgian scientists installed a laser projector to record the direction of a shadow with maximum precision. The result was paradoxical. The beam didn't exactly line up with the shadow. The difference was several centimeters, and it changed every second, as if the shadow itself were pulsating, living a life of its own. Later, the researchers tried to trace the shadow line in a digital model. It crossed the desert, passed over rocky ridges, and eventually reached an unmarked point in the Nubian desert. There was nothing there, no buildings, no archaeological sites, no natural anomalies. Only sand. But infrared imaging revealed a deep cavity beneath the surface. It had an unknown shape and was surrounded by a dense layer of rock. No excavations were conducted there. No researchers ever reached the site. They either abandoned it or never returned. On the surface of the obelisk, at its base, is an inscription, partially erased, which translates as, "Follow that which leaves no trace." Egyptologists believe this is a poetic image. However, physicists who have studied the phenomenon believe otherwise. If the shadow doesn't point north, doesn't follow the sun, and doesn't match the object's geometry, it's not being created by light, but by another source. Perhaps a gravitational distortion, or a field we can't see. The obelisk doesn't just cast a shadow. It's connected to a point outside our space. And the shadow isn't a projection. It's a pointer. To a place where there is no time, no light, no matter. Only a direction. And one day, perhaps, someone will follow it to its end. A jade-walled chamber beneath the Temple of Karnak. In 2001, during restoration work in the eastern part of the Karnak Temple complex, a team of engineers noticed an unusual depression beneath one of the slabs. Beneath a layer of limestone lay a completely sealed cavity. When the workers removed the slabs, they discovered a descent, a narrow shaft-like passage descending approximately 6 meters. Below was an irregularly oval-shaped chamber, not visible on any plans. It was the walls of this chamber that were the source of shock. They were lined with slabs of jade, neither decorated nor inlaid, but completely covered with smooth, tightly fitted layers of green translucent stone. Each plate was no more than 3 centimeters thick, but they formed a continuous covering from floor to ceiling. Jade was not used as a building material in Egypt, and no similar structure had been discovered before. The seams between the plates were no thicker than a hair. The adhesive, if present, defied analysis. It didn't react to acids, didn't melt, and didn't evaporate when heated to 800 degrees Celsius. But even stranger was the air itself in the chamber. It was cold. At a depth where heat would normally be detected, the temperature was exactly 15 degrees. Furthermore, the sensors detected a slight vibration in the walls, barely perceptible, about 1 vibration per second. The stone walls seemed to pulse. Sound within was muffled. Voices echoed, as if reflected from a space deeper than the chamber's dimensions allowed. There was a pedestal on the floor, smooth, gray, and of unidentifiable composition. On it was a trace of an object, a circular imprint with a hollow in the center, as if a ball had lain there. But the object itself was missing. 3 days after the opening, the room was closed again. The official explanation was structural instability. Excavation documents are classified. Several people working on the site later complained of constant ringing in the ears, headaches, and a feeling of dense silence. One engineer reported seeing a green light with his eyes closed, emanating not from outside, but from within his skull. According to unofficial data, the jade slabs possessed a weak electrical charge, approximately 0.7 volts per square meter. This is negligible, but impossible for a stone. Some believe the room was neither a sanctuary nor a tomb. It was an insulator, not for storage, but for suppression. The structure, creating an effect of silence and cold, seemed to dampen not sound or heat, but presence itself. Today, the entrance is sealed. A phrase, untranslated in official catalogs, is engraved on the slabs. Loosely translated, it reads, "One must not be heard inside." This isn't a warning, it's a requirement. A scar on a mummy that matches a wound on a living person? In 2009, archaeologists at the Mummy Museum in Luxor put an unusual find on display for the first time. The mummified body of a woman excavated from a burial dating to approximately the 11th century BC. The mummification had been carried out according to all the rules: removal of internal organs, meticulous preparation, and linen bandages. But while preparing for conservation, specialists discovered something strange. On the mummy's left chest, close to the armpit, a deep scar was found, resembling a stab wound. The angle, shape, and placement were unusually precise, as if it were the result of surgery or a violent blow. The scar was clearly visible even through the tissue. To study it in more detail, the body was scanned with a CT scan. The results showed that the injury had penetrated almost to the lung, but the mummification process had completely preserved it. The injury was not post-mortem. The bones around the wound showed initial signs of healing. This meant the woman had survived the blow, lived for some time, and then died. 2 weeks after the mummy was placed on display in the permanent exhibition hall, an event occurred that shocked the scientific community. One of the museum's security guards, a 28-year-old man, was hospitalized with suspected internal bleeding. After an examination, it turned out he had an almost identical wound, a stab wound in the same area at the same angle. But there was no external impact, no scar, no cut. The doctor described it as damage from within, as if something had passed through the tissue and stopped. The security guard survived, but after being discharged, he refused to return to work. He claimed that he felt pain in his sleep and then woke up with the sensation of someone lying next to him, breathing in sync. These statements were not recorded in the medical reports, but colleagues said he truly wasn't the same. A month later, he left the city. Later, upon re-examination of the mummy, it was discovered that the tissue at the site of the scar had darkened. There was no mold or contamination, only a darkening, as if the skin itself were still reacting. Comparisons with other mummies revealed no similarities. Some Egyptologists believe the scar is a marker of ritual purpose. This woman may have been a priestess involved in a practice involving pain transference. Those who touched her came into contact with something that retained not only the form, but also the memory of the body. It's not a curse. It's not a hoax. It's a preserved structure of pain, seeking a form to reemerge. Perhaps the mummy doesn't simply preserve the body. It continues to remember. And perhaps, sometimes, it shares what it remembers. Without warning. A sand lens through which only one temple is visible. In the northern desert between El Fayum and Bahariya, researchers discovered a phenomenon that is still referred to in scientific publications as an optical anomaly without a physical substrate. Under normal conditions, it is an unremarkable dune, elongated, gently sloping, with fine, shiny sand. But at a certain time of day, closer to sunset, when the sun touches the horizon at an angle of about 25 degrees, the dune begins to shimmer. And an image appears. From the center of the sand, as if through a thick layer of transparent glass, a clear silhouette emerges. A temple consisting of 4 columns, a triangular pediment, and a domed roof. It's intangible, impossible to get closer, impossible to photograph. Cameras see only sand, but the eye sees it, clearly, three-dimensionally, without distortion. Attempts to approach the site of the manifestation lead to disorientation. People begin to get lost within short distances, losing their bearings. Moving toward the image becomes impossible. It seems to slip away. But if they move the required distance, about 45 meters, it reappears, always from the same angle, and only for 8 minutes a day. The first to document the anomaly was Egyptian physicist Amir Khalid. He spent 3 days at the site, attempting to measure temperature and humidity fluctuations. Everything pointed to a mirage effect. However, the air temperature during this period did not maintain the required gradient. Moreover, mirages are always distorted, doubled, and fluctuating. Here, there was complete stability. At the same time, archival images from reconnaissance satellites were studied. One of them, taken in 1976, captured a faint reflection, the outline of a structure precisely matching the contours of the temple. However, all subsequent images show the reflection as empty. One of the expedition members described the state that arises during observation, a feeling as if one's vision is clung to the image, as if the eye cannot look away. And after a few minutes, a strange state of calm sets in, muffled, without anxiety, but with the sensation of being heard. Not seen, not felt, but heard. Some speculate that this isn't a mirage, but rather the effect of a sand lens, a natural structure capable of refracting light in a specific way. However, this would require ideal conditions that coincide daily, which is virtually impossible. Another hypothesis: the temple is not projected, but preserved. Like a hologram recorded within the very structure of the sand, like a memory of space, an imprint of ancient light, captured not on film, but in matter. If this is true, then the temple itself may no longer exist, or not yet. But it once existed at a certain point in time, and every evening it tries to be seen again, only from one place, only with one glance. Like a message that can be read, but only when you stop and realize you're looking not at a mirage, but out a window at a different time. The Book of the Dead, found in 3 different places, with different endings. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo holds a scroll over 60 meters long, one of the most complete versions of the Book of the Dead, the sacred text that accompanies the soul of the deceased into the afterlife. It was discovered in 1936 in the tomb of the scribe Intef. The scroll is unique. The calligraphy is impeccable. The illustrations are vibrant. The structure is complete. But most striking is the ending. Instead of the traditional scene of the weighing of the heart and admission to the fields of Ialu, the scroll ends with the phrase, "And he awoke." There's no description of a trial, no afterlife, simply an awakening, as if everything that came before was a dream or an illusion. At first, this was thought to be a scribal error or the result of missing fragments. But 20 years later, a second scroll was found in a temple in Abydos, almost identical in content, design, and even size. The difference, again, was in the ending. Where the end should have been, the phrase, "It was returned," appeared. Beyond it, there was absolute emptiness, no text, no lines, as if the scribe had deliberately left the end blank. And in 2008, a third copy was found in the Teb Tunis region, virtually identical to the previous ones. However, its ending contained a disturbing formulation, and he remembered that he was not alone. Next came symbols not found in any other source. Deciphering them is difficult. They correspond neither to classical hieroglyphs nor to demotic. According to one theory, they are not alphabetic, but numerical, like a sequence of coordinates or timestamps. 3 books, the same path, different endings. As if the same person had undergone a ritual 3 times, and each time awakened in a new state. The usual explanation is that the text was rewritten to order, but the structure of the books contradicts this theory. They were written by the same hand, in the same style, with the same rhythm. Paleographers claim they are the work of a single master, or a single consciousness. Some researchers have hypothesized that these aren't different copies, but fragments of a single whole scattered across space. That each version is a layer, and together they form not a story of an afterlife, but a mechanism, a code in which different endings create not a choice, but a cycle. Today, the scrolls are kept separately, but everyone who has studied them simultaneously notes one thing. When reading the final lines, one feels as if someone is watching, not the text, but the reader. And at that moment, a strange tension arises, as if the ending of the book hasn't been written, because it's waiting for you to finish reading and decide whether to wake up or be brought back, or remember that you're not alone and that someone has already read it before you and made a choice. From the steps that lead down, but you can't go down them twice. The Temple of Montu in Todd, one of Upper Egypt's little-known sanctuaries, conceals a staircase known to only a few researchers. It lies behind the inner altar, behind a hingeless door that can only be opened from the inside. The steps, carved directly into the limestone, are narrow, without railings, and covered in time-polished stone. It appears to be a typical descent to the lower chambers of the temple, like hundreds of others. But this staircase has a peculiarity that cannot be explained. Anyone descending it for the first time climbs about 33 steps, after which they find themselves in a small chamber with bare walls. On the floor is a circle of copper plates embedded in the stone. In the center of the circle is nothing. No sarcophagus, no altar, no figurines. Only a barely perceptible sensation of a faint vibration beneath the soles of the feet. But the main thing begins later. When I try to go back, the stairs are gone. The passage is closed, or has disappeared. The open door through which the man descended no longer exists. The walls are smooth. The space is enclosed. Those who have been inside claim that after some time another exit appears, a small opening leading outside, but on the other side of the temple. No one has died. No one has disappeared forever. But everyone who has walked this path has said one thing: they were unable to descend the same steps a second time. Engineering studies have shown that such a passage is architecturally impossible. The structure of the temple's underground chambers does not include such a chamber. Ground-penetrating radar (GPR) does not detect a void at the required location. Aerial scanning also reveals no tunnels. However, video footage taken inside confirms the presence of a staircase. One of the researchers mounted a GPO camera and descended. The footage lasted 7 minutes. Descent, camera, pause, and then a sharp jump. He emerges through an arch on the other side of the temple with no staircase behind him. But the strangest thing is in the testimony of those who descended. Each described the chamber's interior differently. For one, it was a dark cell with the smell of dust. For another, it was a brightly lit room with reflective walls. One said he saw symbols on the floor. Another said he heard someone whispering behind him, even though he was alone. Descriptions of the steps also varied, from 30 to 35. The angle, from 40 to 60 degrees. The descent time, from 3 to 15 minutes. This staircase is probably not an object in the usual sense. It is an event, a transition that exists only once for each person. After that, it no longer opens, not because it disappears, but because it has already been used, like a door that closes not from the outside, but from within you. To Arthur, in which there is no name, only emptiness and line. In the temple of Ramses II at Abu Simbel, among the meticulously carved reliefs glorifying the king as the embodiment of divine will, there is one element long ignored by archaeologists. It is located on the side wall of the inner gallery, between scenes of the offering of gifts and the triumph over the Hittites. Where the pharaoh's name is usually carved within an oval frame, a cartouche, an unusual symbol has been discovered. There's nothing inside the oval, no hieroglyphs, no symbols, no decorative lines, just a horizontal line, short and thin, like a stray stroke or an underprint. But the stone is polished and the line is carved with the same skill as everything else. It wasn't added later. It's original. In Egyptian tradition, a cartouche is a sacred frame for a name, enclosing the essence of a ruler's personality and immortality. An empty cartouche is impossible. Even in cursed or erased names, a trace always remains, a fragment, a mistake, a sign of deletion. Here, however, there is complete emptiness, a line without beginning or end, like a dash without context, like a pause written in stone. It was first studied by the German Egyptologist Franz Dirk in 1947. He proposed that it was a blank for a name that was never completed. However, analysis of the surface traces revealed that the cartouche was carved simultaneously with the rest of the wall elements. There was no mistake. Dirk later changed his mind. In private letters, he referred to this symbol as a silent name. In 2006, archaeologists conducted a microscan of the surface. It was discovered that, at the molecular level, the stone structure differed in the area of the line. It was as if high temperature or radiation had been applied to this spot. In a pinpoint, straight line. The area of the stone in this area was less dense, almost porous. This wasn't a decorative line. It was the result of a process unknown to us. Some suggest it's not a name, but a designation of absence, not of something that didn't exist, but of something that can't be named. Ancient Egyptian mythology has the concept of the name that cannot be spoken, a name whose knowledge confers power. But if it's carved, it can already be recognized. Therefore, it can't be shown, even in the form of symbols. Then the cartouche with the line isn't a mistake. It's a defense, or a mask, or an attempt to capture not the name, but its absence as an essence. Today, tourists pass by this sign without noticing it. It's unremarkable, but museum staff say compasses tremble near it. Cameras don't focus. And audio recordings made in this corner reveal a steady, barely audible squeak at a frequency of 22 hertz. It's not a name. It's a signal, set in stone, in a single line, as if someone once wanted to be named, but changed their mind and remained in silence. A drum that produces sound without being struck, found in the Temple of Set. In the ancient Temple of Set at Abydos, among the reliefs, columns, and shrines, lies a closed gallery, rarely accessible even to scholars. In 1998, during restoration work, a strange object was discovered there, a cylindrical structure of dark wood covered in leather. It resembled a drum, though its shape was closer to a vertical capsule with a rounded top. It was about 80 centimeters high and about 40 in diameter. Its surface was unadorned, but with pitted markings, as if from claws. Not a single hieroglyph was present. The object lay in a niche beneath the altar, covered in layers of sand and dust. There were no accompanying artifacts, only a stone with the inscription, "It sounds when it is heard." This inscription was long considered a metaphor or a joke by an ancient master, until the object began to be studied. The researchers set it up in a special lab and hooked it up to microphones. For the first 24 hours, there was silence. But on the 48th hour, one of the engineers heard a dull hum, barely audible, low like air vibration. The recording showed a steady pulsation at 6-second intervals. No one had touched the drum. It didn't vibrate physically, but the sound was there, faint but steady. It was noted that the sound only occurred when a person was present in the room. Cameras left alone recorded nothing. But if an observer was nearby, a rhythm emerged. Its frequency matched the beta rhythms of the brain during a state of concentration. And most importantly, the sound varied among different people. Some heard thumps, others a pulse, and still others a whisper, similar to breathing. During one session, when the researcher was nearby for over 2 hours, the sound intensified. It became multi-layered, like a drum roll, then like footsteps. The man left the room and refused to return. In his report, he wrote, "It's not a sound, it's a reverse wave. It doesn't go out, it goes in." A medical examination revealed that his pulse rate coincided with the sound's intervals during the experiment. It was later hypothesized that the drum is a resonator activated not by touch, but by consciousness. The structure responds to attention, as if used not to produce rhythm, but to register presence. Not the listener, but the observer from within. The object is currently kept in an isolated chamber, but once a year it is placed in the museum's open hall on the day of the autumnal equinox. And every time at precisely 11:11 a.m., a brief low-frequency pulse is detected near it, even if the hall is empty. The drum may never have beaten. Its sound is not a trace, but a call, and it only sounds when someone hears, or when someone inside wants to be heard. With the Sphinx with closed eyes, but photographs from the 20th century show otherwise. The Great Sphinx of Giza is one of the most recognizable and, at the same time, most misunderstood sculptures in human history. It has been silent for thousands of years. Its face is eroded by time, its body is carved from solid rock, and most researchers agree on one thing: it is older than it appears. But in 2005, photographic plates were discovered in the archives of the Cairo Institute of Archaeology that raised a disturbing question. They showed the Sphinx, clearly in profile and full face. The photographs were dated 1919, and in these images, its eyes were open. In the photo, the pupils aren't just shadows. Clear concave lines, the curve of the eyelid, and the direction of gaze are visible. One of the frames shows a slight glint in the eye. These photos were taken at different times of day, under different lighting, but the pupil line remained consistent. The modern Sphinx has closed eyes. There's no relief, no line, no indentations. Just smooth stone, as if worn away. No document records restoration that could have destroyed the eyes. No expedition has reported the destruction of facial features, especially such precise ones. 20th century photographs with modern ones, slight discrepancies were revealed in the structure of the forehead and bridge of the nose. The stone seemed to have changed, as if the facial expression had become different, less observant, more detached. Some scientists suggested the photographs had been retouched. However, when Oxford chemists analyzed the plates, they discovered that the images were genuine and unaltered. The plates captured the light reflected from the object without any intervention. Even stranger was the photographer's diary, Henry Weston. In one entry, he writes, "I think he was looking too vividly, too directly. I took 3 shots and then turned away. It felt as if I wasn't taking a picture, but catching a glance, and he might turn around." His last trip to Egypt was then. He never returned or commented on the materials. Later, a copy of one of the photographs was found in the archive, printed on paper and faded with time. If you hold it up to the light, the line of the eye is still visible, but at a certain angle, it disappears, as if it only appears at the moment of capture, only when you look at it. Some believe the Sphinx watches only when no one is watching, that its gaze isn't carved, but dormant. or hidden for the time being, and that its eyes aren't artistic details, but mechanisms. And if they were ever open, it means something was awakened. Perhaps that's why they're closed now, not by time, not by the wind, but on purpose, to avoid looking again, or to avoid being seen. An amulet that causes the same dream in all owners. In 2007, an artifact whose origin remained unclear appeared in a private collection of antique jewelry in Cairo. It was a small amulet made of lapis lazuli, a blue stone with golden veins, oval in shape, and engraved with a symbol resembling an eye, but without the pupil. In the center is a horizontal line surrounded by a ring from which rays radiate. The symbol has not been identified as an Egyptian hieroglyph. However, the shape of the piece and the technique of execution indicate an ancient Egyptian origin, circa 14th century BC. The collector who received the artifact wore it around his neck for several days. On the fourth night, he had a strange dream. He stood on a high slope, surrounded by desert, looking up at the sky, where a dark spiral swirled. He awoke with a feeling of unease, and for the first time in his life, with a bloody nose. The artifact was passed on to another owner. A week later, he described a nearly identical dream. A slope, a desert, a spiral in the sky. Only in his version, the ground beneath his feet trembled, and outstretched arms protruded from the sand as if trying to grasp the air. He woke up in a panic, with severe tachycardia. This went on for several years. The amulet passed from hand to hand, by chance through sales, barter, and gifts. But each time its new owner, 4 to 6 nights later, reported the same dream. The landscape might vary in detail, but 3 elements were always present: a desert, a slope, and a black spiral in the sky. Some dreamed of a voice uttering incomprehensible words. Others had the feeling of someone watching from under the sand. One of the owners, a psychologist by profession, conducted an experiment. He gave the amulet to 3 subjects without telling them the story. All 3 began experiencing nightmares a week later. 2 described the same scenario. The third withdrew and refused to talk. Magnetic resonance imaging revealed that the amulet contains ferromagnetic inclusions, which are not typical of lapis lazuli. The stone reacts to electromagnetic fields, accumulating a charge. Research has shown that when a weak current flows through the circuit to which the amulet is connected, it pulsates at a frequency close to delta waves in the brain, the waves active during sleep. Today, the amulet is kept in a closed section of the Institute of Sleep and Neurophysiology in Paris. It is not worn, but even in its sealed container, anomalies are recorded nearby. Disruptions in schedules, abnormal rhythms, and employee complaints of insomnia. One security guard, unaware of its contents, wrote in a report, "I didn't sleep all night. I kept feeling like I was dreaming of a slope and standing on it while someone below counted slowly, out loud." The amulet is most likely not cursed. It carries a signal, a memory, or a command. Perhaps it is an artifact that activates something long recorded within a person. And every dream is not a symbol, but a fragment of a single dream, about something that was, or will be, a room where one cannot remain silent. In 2010, while exploring a closed outbuilding at the Temple of Hatshepsut in Deir el-Bahari, a narrow passage room was discovered, windowless, unadorned, with a single entrance. Its walls were smooth, unmarked, and covered with a thick layer of lime. It seemed as if it had never been used. But the strange thing was something else. Anyone who stayed inside for more than a minute without speaking began to experience increasing pressure in their head, intense anxiety, and a feeling as if the walls were closing in. At first, this was attributed to claustrophobia. However, the effect occurred even in those who didn't suffer from confined spaces. Archaeologists decided to install audio sensors. During the initial stage, in complete silence, the equipment detected a faint increase in low-frequency waves, approximately 10 Hz. After 45 seconds, the frequency began to fluctuate. After 90, a standing wave arose, reminiscent of a roar. Not loud, but dense and oppressive, as if the air inside became heavy. When people started talking in the room, even whispering, the effect disappeared. The wave subsided and the blood pressure returned to normal. But as soon as the conversation stopped, the same thing happened again. One of the researchers spent 7 minutes in the room, periodically repeating meaningless phrases out loud. He claimed that the voice seemed to push back the walls. After he was silent for a minute and a half, blood began to appear in the corner of his eye. A medical examination revealed no cause. The blood vessels were intact. Under a layer of lime on the floor, archaeologists discovered an engraving, a chain of symbols arranged in a circle. Among them were fragments of the words Ma'at, honor, breath, and a symbol denoting the sound of life. This combination was used in Egyptian rituals of soul awakening, but not in funerary rites, more likely in initiatory practices. One Egyptologist hypothesized that the room served as a presence check, not of gods, not of spirits, but of the person themselves. Silence in this place was seen not as peace, but as a threat, as a way to be consumed. To speak is to remain. To remain silent is to disappear, not physically, but at the level of essence. The room is now walled up. A slab with the inscription "Ra protects those who speak" was left at the entrance. This is the only place in the temple where the god Ra is referred to not as light, but as the guardian of sound. The room would have been unremarkable if not for one detail. A camera recording, left unattended, captured a rustling sound during 90 seconds of silence. It didn't match breathing, didn't correspond with footsteps, and had no rhythm. It was a word, but it was spoken backwards, by a voice that, according to the recordings, wasn't in the room. The room waits for silence, for someone to disappear again, into the silence, a mark on the body that appears in all witnesses of the same cry. In 1992, minor excavations were conducted near the ruins of an ancient settlement in the Wadi El Natran region, northwest of Cairo. A group of German archaeology students discovered a burial niche buried beneath the sand, which they believed to be part of an early Christian monastery. Inside, there was only a stone floor and bare walls. But in the center lay a strange object, a flat stone slab with a hollow as if for a head. Not a sarcophagus, not an altar, simply a surface as if meant for lying on and listening. That evening, one of the students decided to stay put and spend the night near the discovery. He claimed to have heard a sound, not a voice, not a scream, but something like a growing ringing, turning into a moan. 30 seconds later, he fled back to camp in shock. He couldn't speak, only cried. The next morning, a mark was discovered on his chest, a red oval, like a burn, with a pattern resembling an elongated teardrop with a curve. The mark disappeared within 24 hours. But 3 days later, it appeared on 2 other members of the expedition. They didn't hear the sound directly, but only saw the boy running. The situation was attributed to overheating, until a 4th case emerged in an employee who was watching a video from the discovery site. He wasn't at the excavation site. He simply turned on the tape. 45 minutes later, he felt ill. He later reported hearing a background sound similar to breathing in the recording and feeling pressure on his chest. The next day, the same mark. Since then, more than 10 cases have been counted. Everyone claimed to hear not just a sound, but something alive, as if someone was trying to call out, not with a voice, but with an internal one, breaking from beyond the limits of human speech. The slab was moved to Cairo and placed in an isolated box. When attempting to record the background sound, the equipment malfunctioned. The acoustic camera recorded only a steady, incomprehensible pulse, like a low moan. Approximately 62 hertz. All the victims developed the same mark. It lasted from 1 to 3 days. Infrared images show that the skin in this area glows with a faint internal luminescence. Tests show no changes, no burns, no inflammation. Only light from within. One Egyptologist who studied the slab suggested that it was the place where a scream was imprinted. Perhaps someone died in a moment of extreme emotional stress, and their final scream didn't dissolve, but was absorbed into the stone, not as a sound, but as a structure. And now anyone who gets too close doesn't hear it, but relives that moment, not with their mind, but with their body. A mark isn't a burn, it's a response to someone else's pain, conveyed beyond words. And whoever hears it once bears it forever, albeit invisibly, a stone with symbols that appear only in moonlight. In 1966, while constructing a road to an archaeological site near Siwa, construction workers accidentally unearthed a flat stone lying about 1.5 meters below the surface. It was black, heavy, and had a matte surface. There were no drawings, inscriptions, or chips on it. It was dismissed as construction debris until one of the workers noticed, under the full moon, the stone begins to glow. Not with phosphorescence or reflection. Lines appear on its surface, thin as if scratched from within. They are invisible during the day, don't appear in artificial light, disappear under clouds, and appear only in complete silence under direct moonlight. Researchers who gained access to the find photographed the symbols. They weren't hieroglyphs, cuneiform, or pictograms. Rather, they were sequences of geometric shapes, circles, elongated figure eights, connected angles. No known language matched them, but the rhythm was repetitive. It seemed less like writing than a diagram or a code. Spectral analysis revealed that the stone's composition did not match typical Egyptian basalt. It contained rare minerals with a crystal lattice similar to synthetic materials. Microscopic inclusions resembling fibrous threads fused into the stone's structure were present within the rock. They were not subject to deformation, did not heat, and did not react to acid. Over the following years, the stone was kept in a dark room. Every time there was a full moon, it was taken out into the open, and each time the symbols appeared in the same order. But after 6 years, the line changed. A new element appeared, a closed loop in the center of which was a vertical symbol resembling a human figure. After this change, one of the researchers began to suffer from obsessive images in his dreams. He described the same thing over and over again, a stone standing in the center of a circle surrounded by emptiness, and the symbols on it slowly moving, like a clock, like a mechanism. He woke up with the sensation that something was moving not only on the stone, but also in his mind, as if this drawing was not for the eyes, but for the brain. Later, digital analysis revealed that the sequence of symbols, when combined with the lunar calendar, forms a rhythm that coincides with the tidal cycles. Some suggested it was a calendar. Others speculated that it was a mechanism for tracking not earthly time, but external time. Perhaps it wasn't a memory of events, but a system of signals, awaiting the right conditions. Today, the stone is kept in a laboratory under constant observation. But staff note that even without light, in complete darkness, a faint glow sometimes appears on the surface. It's invisible to the naked eye, but the camera sees it. The photo shows a flash as if someone had just looked at it and disappeared. And each new lunar cycle brings a new change to the design, as if someone is writing, little by little, a message stretched out over centuries, waiting for the night when you look and realize that part of the symbol was already inside you. A burial in which the clock ran backwards. In the El Kab region of Upper Egypt, near a rocky outcrop, archaeologists in 2001 stumbled upon an unusual solitary burial. Situated away from known necropolises between two granite massifs, it seemed unremarkable from the outside. A small entrance niche led into a cramped chamber. Inside was an unadorned wooden sarcophagus, a clay vessel, and a small mirror, darkened by time. But what happened next is inexplicable. One of the scientists left his watch in the chamber. He simply forgot it on a box next to the sarcophagus. 30 minutes later, he returned and discovered the watch hands moving backwards. The second hand was moving backwards at the perfect speed. The battery was fine. The watch was undamaged. When they took it outside, the hand moved forward again. The experiment was repeated with other watches, digital, mechanical, and quartz. In all cases, malfunctions were recorded inside the chamber. The digital watches froze. The mechanical ones lost their speed. Some of them recorded negative time, as if the countdown were moving backwards from the future rather than forwards from zero. Outside the chamber, everything worked reliably. The research team installed a CCTV camera with a timer there. The footage showed the clock inside the room actually rewinding time. But when the film was played back at fast speed, it created a strange sensation. It wasn't the object moving, but the space around it that was rewinding. Time in the camera seemed to slowly return to its starting point. Architecturally, the room was unremarkable, an ordinary rock cutout. But the walls had one peculiarity. They didn't reflect sound. Voices inside sounded muffled, as if absorbed. And, according to eyewitnesses, after several minutes inside, a sensation of slowing occurred, not only of the body, but also of thought. Breaths became longer, movements became viscous. People lost track of time. Some thought they'd been inside for 10 minutes, although 40 had passed. Others felt the opposite. The vessel found next to the sarcophagus contained an unknown sediment. Analysis revealed organic compounds, completely destroyed, with no trace of DNA. It was as if everything inside had been erased. The mirror lying nearby was non-reflective. Its surface was smooth but black, as if coated with a layer of light-absorbing material. Neither the people nor the lamp were reflected in it. Since then, access to the chamber has been restricted. One researcher, who visited several times, later wrote, "I don't know how old I am. Sometimes it seems younger. Sometimes as if I've lived here before." His diary ended with the strange line, "Nothing happens inside, only return." A burial site can be more than just a mausoleum. It can be a place where time responds, not linearly, not logically. It doesn't move there, it remembers. And everyone who enters brings with them a fragment of the clock's journey, which perhaps will one day return to the beginning, or to the end, depending on where you look from. A body that has not decomposed for 7,000 years, without mummification. In 1995, in the Jerza region of eastern Egypt, a team of researchers conducting archaeological surveys before construction work began discovered a burial in a sand layer at a depth of about 2.5 meters. It wasn't designed as a tomb, just a body lying on its side in a sleeping position, without a sarcophagus, without a cloth wrapping, without ritual objects. No gold amulets, no inscriptions, no vessels. Just sand and a dense layer of stone under which everything was preserved. The burial, determined by radiocarbon dating, was approximately 7,000 years old. That's long before the pharaohs, before writing, before known religious rituals. But most importantly, the body had not decomposed. The skin remained intact. The tissue was intact. The hair was thick, black, and not shedding. The organs were partially preserved. No traces of mummification were found. No resins, salts, or tar were used. Nothing that could explain such anomalous preservation. The body temperature is slightly below the ambient temperature, but it is not cold, not warm. It was described as off temperature. When touched, the skin feels firm and alive, but there is no pulse. The heart is present, but there are no signs of stopping or decay. Scans showed that the bones had not lost density, and the cellular structure was intact. Some biologists hypothesized that the tissues had produced a unique compound that prevented decay. But chemical analysis revealed nothing of the sort. On the contrary, The cells were devoid of even the usual bacterial background. It was as if the body had never interacted with the surrounding biology. The face is calm. The features are unfamiliar. It doesn't match the typical anthropology of the region. The skull is elongated, the lips are thin, the chin is pointed. The eyes were closed. But when one of the researchers illuminated the face with ultraviolet light, the eyelids lifted slightly. Reflex? Tissue failure? Or a reaction? The body was placed in a sealed capsule. It remains unchanged. More than 20 years after its discovery, there is no sign of decay. One day in 2009, a single anomaly was recorded. Surveillance cameras showed a microscopic movement of the fingers of the left hand, 6 millimeters. The recording was checked, repeated. It wasn't vibration. It was movement. The staff on duty near the capsule described dreams, recurring ones. They feature a desert, a rock, and a figure kneeling, staring into the sand. It doesn't speak, but it radiates a sense of peace and anxiety at the same time. Some speculate that this isn't the body of an ancient human, but a donated body, like a vessel or a repository. Not dead, but not alive either. It's waiting, not for resurrection, but for the moment when someone says the right word or makes the right gesture, and then the body will awaken, not because it was asleep, but because that's exactly how it was intended. 7,000 years ago, a drawing in a tomb depicting the Earth from space. In 1972, a Polish expedition led by Professors Zdzisław Nowicki explored a previously uncleared tomb in the Elminia region. The burial was located deep in the rock face, away from the major temples and royal necropolises. It was unusual. The walls inside were smooth, with polished limestone slabs covered with strange, non-ritual images. One of them immediately caught my attention. In the central niche, above the ledge where the name of the deceased is usually placed, a circular figure was carved. Inside it were the continents, jagged, elongated shapes, but when superimposed on modern maps, they resembled the outlines of Africa, South America, and even Antarctica with alarming accuracy. Along the edge of the circle is a curved line, like an orbit, and next to it is a small crescent symbol reminiscent of the moon. 4 figures stood near the circle. Not gods, not pharaohs. Their bodies were elongated, their hands folded not in the Egyptian manner, but in front of their chests, palms outward. Their faces were featureless, only large, round eyes. No traditional Egyptian iconography contains such forms. The drawing was engraved with astonishing precision. Professor Nowicki was the first to suggest that it was a cosmological diagram. He asked colleagues from the Aerospace Institute to compare the outlines with the view of Earth from orbit. The match was almost perfect. Even the shape of the cloud belt visible in satellite images resembled the engraved lines at the top of the drawing. The skeptics' arguments boiled down to geometrical coincidence and abstract mythological representation. But after detailed analysis, it was established that the depicted Antarctica was not covered in ice. The outlines matched prehistoric maps, in particular a hypothetical reconstruction of the coastline before the last ice age. On one of the lower slabs was carved a text that roughly translates as, "He looked down to remember the way back. Who he is unknown." But the word for looked is written with a hieroglyph used exclusively for visual action. Not inner vision, not dreaming, but physical gaze. Later, in 2003, the tomb was re-examined. The drawing was partially damaged for an unknown reason. The fragment with the continents was erased. Only infrared images preserved its trace. Some speculate that this is a memory, passed down by the priests, recorded in stone. Perhaps it wasn't they themselves who saw it, but someone before them, or someone with them. And if the ancients truly remembered the earth not from below, but from above, that means one thing: someone was already there, long before satellites, before instruments, before words. And perhaps that glance wasn't an observation, but a farewell, a secret altar that opens only on the day of the summer solstice. Deep within the Karnak complex, in one of the most remote and little-known halls, researchers at the end of the 19th century discovered a strange niche sealed with heavy slabs. At first glance, it appeared to be just part of a wall, but when struck with a hammer, it produced a distinct sound. Not the dull, solid sound of a solid mass, but a ringing, hollow sound. They decided not to clear it out at the time, fearing a collapse. It was only in 2004 that an Egyptian archaeological team decided to return to this anomaly. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that the stone was not monolithic, but had cut lines hidden within the relief pattern. Neither manual nor mechanical movement of the slabs was possible. However, under ultraviolet light, a previously invisible inscription appeared: "It will open when the light becomes direct and the shadow disappears." This was perceived as a metaphor until one of the project participants suggested conducting the experiment on the summer solstice, June 21st. That day, at the appointed time, when the sun reached its highest point, a single narrow beam of light penetrated a previously unnoticeable crack in the ceiling. It struck the exact center of the panel. 7 seconds later, a click was heard. One of the slabs began to slowly slide aside. A chamber about 2 meters deep opened. Inside was a stone altar, perfectly smooth, without any inscriptions. Above it, a suspended quartz fragment hung from a bronze chain. Sunlight penetrated the crystal and diffused across the walls, creating a geometric pattern. Circles radiating from the center, intersecting at points, forming something resembling a star map. The altar was cold, even under direct sunlight. The temperature inside the chamber was 4 degrees lower than outside. Not a speck of dust, not a trace of organic matter, as if it had just been created, or just opened. On the floor in front of the altar are footprints, not human, 3-toed, elongated, symmetrical, not carved, pressed into the stone as if someone had stood on it and left a mark in the hard granite. After sunset, the chamber closed again. No mechanism, no sound. An attempt to open it manually was unsuccessful. It doesn't respond to light, heat, or vibrations. Only on that very day, at that very time, once a year, does it appear, and then disappears again. Some believe the altar was used to communicate with celestial objects. Others believe it was a synchronization point. But among the Egyptian texts, one, almost forgotten, was found. When the stone is opened and the light shines within, the one who looks should remember that he has seen it before. As if the altar is not an instrument, but a key to a door through which someone has already passed and left a light as a sign that he will return one day, on the same day, at the same hour, when the shadow disappears. A stone slab that disappeared from the museum without a trace. For decades, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo housed a small but strange stone slab discovered near Memphis in 1917. It was modest in size, about 30 centimeters wide and 40 centimeters high. The stone was a dense black diorite polished to a mirror shine. There were no hieroglyphs on the front, only a series of unfamiliar incised symbols, repeating squares, intersecting circles, and broken lines. All attempts to decipher the symbols proved unsuccessful. The drawings did not correspond to any known language or numerical system. The slab's peculiarity was that under certain lighting conditions, it began to extinguish shadows. When the light source was directed at an acute angle, surrounding objects cast distinct shadows, but the slab itself did not. Moreover, the area behind it, which the shadow was supposed to obscure, remained illuminated. This seemed like an optical illusion until the surveillance cameras began to record glitches. The image around the slab began to flicker, as if some of the pixels had stopped responding to light. For several years, the slab was kept in a separate display case with tinted glass. It was neither displayed nor advertised. In records, it was listed under the number QX311 and described as an unidentified cult object. In 2002, during a routine inventory, the stove was missing. The display case glass was undamaged. The locks were intact. Surveillance cameras didn't record a single frame of its disappearance. The footage shows a blurry spot at 3:42 a.m., lasting 6 seconds. Then an empty display case. Security guards heard no sound. The alarm didn't go off. An investigation was launched. Employees, visitor lists, and possible technical glitches were checked. Nothing. Not a single person in the building left their post that night. Exits and entrances are blocked. Transportation is impossible. The next day, a footprint was discovered on the wall in the museum's archive room, a rectangular spot where the dust seemed to have been burned out. Its dimensions matched the slab's dimensions exactly, but the slab itself was not there. Footsteps were found on the floor, one footprint, leading inside. Later, one of the custodians noticed that time seemed to blur near the slab's location. Clocks slowed by several seconds per day. People complained of disorientation. 5 employees changed jobs in the following months, citing a constant feeling of being watched. The slab was never found. It never surfaced on the black market. Its photo was banned from publication, but one of those who worked with it later said it wasn't a slab, it was a boundary, just very thin and very dense. And then she figured out how to cross it. And perhaps disappearance isn't a loss, but a transition toward a place once hidden by shadow. But now, it's looking back at us. A labyrinth built under the pyramids, but leading not deep, but sideways. Herodotus mentioned the ancient Egyptian labyrinth. He wrote that he saw it with his own eyes near the pyramids in the Fayum region. Endless corridors, thousands of rooms, halls with stone roofs covered in bas-reliefs. He claimed the structure surpassed even the pyramids. But no archaeological evidence was found until 2007, when a team of Belgian geophysicists conducted a soil study near the pyramid of Amenemhat III. The scan revealed that there is indeed a structure underground, a network of tunnels and chambers covering an area over 1 kilometer long and nearly 400 meters wide. But unlike most underground structures which spiral or step downwards, this system is horizontal. It's as if someone deliberately built it not into the ground, but along its edge, precisely toward the pyramid, but not underneath it. The entrance to the structure has still not been found. Beneath the surface lies a dense layer of sandstone interspersed with cavities. Local drilling yielded a strange result. Upon reaching a depth of 12 meters, the probe encountered a void. At that moment, a pulse erupted within the equipment, a short signal similar to a mechanical echo, as if the probe had struck not a rock, but a cavity with an acoustic resonance. Later, drones equipped with ground-penetrating radar detected repeating patterns, parallel corridors connected by narrow passages, like a honeycomb. Some of them form regular shapes, triangles, diamonds, octagons. Everything is constructed according to complex geometry, as if the system utilizes not only space, but also the principles of sound, light, and even time reflection. Several researchers have proposed a hypothesis. The labyrinth was not a burial site, but a map, or a mechanism. The tunnels may not have been for human movement, but for transmitting signals, sound, vibration, energy. The chambers, arranged in a strict order, create the effect of a wave route. It is impossible to walk through them because they are not a path for feet, but a path for frequencies. Inside one of the drill probes, they found particles of an alloy not typical of the local geology, microscopic fragments of metal with signs of processing. It was non-magnetic. It did not oxidize. It did not belong to this era. The research team was disbanded. The official explanation was that unstable ground made it impossible to continue. But one of the participants, speaking anonymously, later said, "We didn't find the entrance because we weren't looking properly. It's not a structure, it's a door, just not outward, inward, deep into the horizon. not downward, but sideways. If the labyrinth truly exists, then it awaits not the one who digs, but the one who is attuned, like a wave to a receiver. And then a passage will open, not in the earth, but in space. At that point where reality folds and says, "Now you are inside." The Eye of Horus carved into the wall from the inside, no access. In 2012, during the restoration of one of the internal corridors of the Pyramid of Unas, the oldest pyramid with texts, workers came across a micro-crack in the wall, which was previously considered monolithic. Additional scanning revealed a cavity no more than 1.5 meters wide beneath the limestone layer. It had no entrance, hadn't been detected in previous surveys, and geometrically it shouldn't have existed. When the wall was partially opened, a narrow gap was revealed, as if someone had intentionally left a space, but not for a human. Inside, absolute silence, cleanliness, and the absence of dust. And in the very depths of the niche, on the perfectly flat surface of the back wall, was a carved relief. The Eye of Horus. But it wasn't ordinary. It was depicted upside down. It was as if the symbol had been carved not from the outside, but from the inside of the wall, engraved on the backside of the stone, which was physically impossible to work. No traces of drilling, access, or joints were found. The wall was 48 centimeters thick, solid limestone, and yet the relief was clear, deep, and symmetrical. It couldn't have been applied from the accessible side. The symbol itself conveys the idea of protection, all-seeingness, and a balance between consciousness and perception. But in this inversion, it seemed to look not outward, but inward, not guarding, but observing, watching those who gaze into it. Researchers have long debated whether it was created before the stone was laid. But that raises the question, why carve a sacred symbol where no one would see it? Thermography showed that the temperature in the niche was 2 degrees lower than in the rest of the pyramid. Instruments detected a weak electrostatic field at the eye site. It was harmless, but persistent. One technician claimed that after standing in front of the relief for more than 3 minutes, he felt as if someone were touching the back of his head. Near the niche, a tile with an inscription made using an unusual technique was discovered on the floor. The symbols were burned, not carved. The inscription can be translated as, "He sees when you forget you're looking." The grammar of this phrase is unusual. It uses the verb to forget in the form of an action occurring in the present moment, as if it's not a moment of inattention, but a loss of awareness of observation itself. Since then, the niche has been sealed with glass. Access is restricted, but the cameras inside continue to record oddities. Sometimes, when viewing the recordings, the viewing angle seems to shift. It's as if the wall itself is slightly warped, and at some point, the eye seems to open wider. Maybe he was always open, we just weren't the ones he wanted to see, until now. A marble column that cannot be measured the same way twice. In one of the side galleries of the Luxor temple, hidden from the main routes and tourist groups, stands a column, at first glance no different from dozens of others. It stands about 6 meters tall, with a diameter of just over a meter. It is made of light-colored marble covered in smooth reliefs. An inscription on the base reads, "Support it while the sky stands." This phrase is traditionally associated with Shu, the deity of air, who holds up the firmament. The column's attention was drawn not by Egyptologists, but by architectural restorers taking measurements for a digital model of the temple. One of the engineers noticed a strange discrepancy. The column's diameter measured in the morning differed from the measurements taken during the day. The difference was minimal, about 3 millimeters, but in architecture, such deviations are impossible without external influence. The measurements were repeated again and again with different devices: a laser tape measure, a mechanical caliper, an infrared scanner. Each time, the result was different. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Sometimes it matched the previous measurement perfectly. And then another time. At first, this was attributed to temperature fluctuations. However, the nearby columns remained stable. Marble, in general, is not prone to deformation with minor climate changes. Furthermore, the column did not produce the slightest crack, did not change color, and showed no signs of expansion on the thermogram. Then they began recording not only the dimensions, but also the light falling on the surface. And they noticed, at a certain angle of the sun, the reliefs on the column begin to change. Not physically, but visually. The lines shift slightly, as if the engraving were moving. This is especially noticeable in the central part of the column, where a symbol is depicted, a circle enclosed in a double spiral. Physicists involved in the study have hypothesized that the column creates a weak field of distorted geometry. Not magnetism or gravity, but something that could be loosely called spatial elasticity. This occurs when the space itself within the object shifts slightly, disrupting the accuracy of measurements. This is impossible in a stone laboratory, but the column continues to change its parameters every day. One of the researchers spent 8 hours with her. He kept a diary, and on page 8 he wrote, "It seems she's breathing. I feel her getting closer." A day later, he couldn't retrace his steps through the gallery. It was as if the passage between the columns had changed, but the map showed everything was in place. Today, the column is fenced off. Tourists are prohibited from access, but at night, according to guards, a light whitish mist rises from it. Not water vapor, not dust, but like a thin veil that ripples slightly and disappears as soon as someone approaches. The column cannot be fixed definitively, because it is not built for form, it is built for a moment, and anyone who attempts to measure it becomes part of the measurement, even if they are unaware of it. What can we say in conclusion? Egypt left behind more than just temples, mummies, and stone. It left a trace in the sand, in the silence, in the space between time and sleep. These 40 mysteries are not a list, nor are they answers, but rather questions that have haunted scholars around the world for several millennia. Where the tunnels lead, what the stone whispers, why the shadows move of their own accord, we don't know. But one thing is clear. This isn't the past. This is anticipation. Things that continue to happen. All that remains is to understand how the people of the past lived, how the remnants of their way of life seem a mystery even to our advanced civilization.